Well, people with criminal records for fraud, terrorism, child sex abuse, terrorism financing will all be banned from the boards of registered charities. God forbid that they're even on these boards. But anyway, the Morrison government made this announcement today by expanding the powers of the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission. Joining me now for their take on all things Friday and the week, Gideon Rozner, Director of Policy at the Institute of Public Affairs in Melbourne, and Nick Cater. He's the Executive Director of the Menzies Research Centre. He joins me now too from Sydney. I'll start with you, Nick. It's a surprise to me that the government would even have to take this step, but clearly they do, because a lot of the charities aren't the charities that we know, the brands that are out there in the marketplace like the Salvation Army and others. A lot of them are fronts for political organisations, particularly on the left, and they've got all manner of people tied up in them.
Yeah, well, exactly. I had exactly the same reaction as you, Peter. I thought, why is this a news story? Surely it's always been, against the regulations for people with criminal convictions and other misdemeanours to be members of charities. But I think it just goes to show, I think, how lax some of the charity regulations are, and they're desperately in need of being tightened up. I think we've taken an attitude to this sector that everybody who gets involved in charity work is well-meaning and decent and honest, and most of them are, of course. Most of the charities are doing excellent work, but there are people around the edges who are exploiting this system. They're exploiting the tax loopholes that go with it and everything around it. Not just, we've seen this with some Muslim groups and other groups of that nature, but also with, of course, the environmental groups who basically take advantage of this tax-free status to, advocate particular policies. So I'm really pleased to see this is happening, and hopefully there'll be more reform of the charity sector.
Yeah, it's interesting too, Gideon. Up until now, we could only knock them off if they had financial dishonesty charges against them. But clearly now, the Charities Commission, headed up by Gary Johns, I think it's been a very good appointment, former Labor MP, I might add, but they now will get access to criminal histories. I think it's pretty important.
I think it is important, and obviously we don't want these charities used as a front for money laundering for terrorism, or, God forbid, somebody with child sex offenders being on charities that work with children. I do worry blanket rules like this do create people who fall through the cracks. For example, now there are cases in which teenagers who sent each other racy pictures on their phones when they were younger were technically in possession of child pornography and have ended up on sex offenders registers. So, look, there are some complexities that need to be accommodated by this, but of course we don't want people with those kind of serious offences on charitable boards. It's a no-brainer. And
I think usually it requires a custodial sentence.
Correct.
Of 12 months.
So a suspended sentence doesn't cut it. So as long as the design is right, then of course it's a no-brainer.
Right, well, I want to move to another issue too, because the IPA has been out there with a lot of research lately, and this one is not a surprise to me, might be to others, but green activists are using the courts to delay projects. The report found that green lawfares forced companies into court more than 10,000 days since the year 2000. This is extraordinary.
Well, as you may know...
I wonder why we never build a dam in this country.
Well, correct, because green groups can hold the whole country to ransom. But as you well know, Peter, this is a particularly bad clause of the Environmental Protection and Bioconservation Act, Section 487, which Tony Abbott, of course, tried to abolish, but like everything else, the Senate blocked it. This is the clause of the Act that allows environmental campaign. It gives them standing in court to challenge projects on environmental grounds.
And let's be very clear, this means that anyone without necessarily a direct interest can join the action.
Not anybody, environmental groups.
Can join the action. And the damaging part of that is often it's vexatious. There's no chance they're likely to win.
Correct.
But if they run a project out by 5 or 6 years, then they hope the investor will decide, look, it's all too hard, and they'll move on.
Exactly. If you were building, an infrastructure company looking to build dams or roads or bridges in other countries, where would you rather put your money? Into a country like Australia, where you could spend hundreds of days in court and millions of dollars in legal fees, or a jurisdiction where they don't have these kind of stupid laws? It actually means that we are attracting less capital and investment, and as you said, less dams and less roads and less things that will benefit all Australians, not just noisy environmental groups.
Nick, with all the coronavirus talk, and we're not going to talk a lot about it tonight because I think people have had absolutely enough, but it might make us wake up about how over-reliant we are on the Chinese miracle right across the economy. We have weighted ourselves heavily in China's favour, and this might be a bit of a wake-up call.
Yeah, look, I think so, and you're seeing this. I think some smart companies have already done this. You know, they've already realised that there's a risk here. So it's been a bit of a revival, for instance, of the Australian furniture making industry, and that's a part in attempts to divert it. But I think particularly with electronic goods, with IT equipment, you know, some of the things we've got in our mobile phones, we could see some real problems here, and I think this will lead to further sort of diversifying of supplies. But yeah, I mean, it's a wake-up call, to use that cliched expression, in a lot of ways, but certainly we have to look at our supply chains and our security, not just on fuel, which we've been looking at, and other things, but on all sorts of range of goods. You know, are we too reliant on one country that has lots of issues and lots of potential problems in it?
All right, you tell me why we're paying Scott Cam Gideon $300,000, which is more than the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff gets paid, I might add. Why are we paying him $300,000 and he's barely done anything?
$350,000 in 18 months.
Okay, $350,000. Yeah. He's already pocketed $145,000, which is for nothing. Yeah. It hasn't even turned up to work. That's more than twice average earnings in this country.
I follow politics very closely. I have no idea who this bloke is or why he was appointed. Of course, it's a waste of money. We shouldn't be appointing these Mickey Mouse ambassadors, bringing normal people into government. We should be sending government to where normal people are. Why not move, for example, the ATO to Mount Isa instead of the Canberra bubble, so they can see how real people live, how real people deal with their tax bills? Why don't we decentralise government, actually make public servants interact with real people?
And also, too, if he thought getting kids into trades was so important as a former tradie himself, he's got plenty of dough. Why doesn't he do it pro bono and donate the money somewhere where it's useful to a charity?
Correct.
I got to go, but Nick, before we go, you're a Brit, formerly a Brit, now an Australian. Gee, we're not in the keep calm and carry on mode at the moment, are we, in the supermarkets?
No, we're not. But look, I mean, I'm going to defend. I think people who go out and stock up on basic household goods are being no more or no less irrational than a lot of the people on the stock market this week. And certainly they're being no more or they're probably more rational than people who go and glue themselves to the pavement because they think there's a climate emergency. There's too much sneering going on over this. I think people are anxious and with good reason, and they react in the way they can. So, you know, I think there's an anti-social element to this. You know, I mean, a mother I know had trouble getting Nurofen this afternoon, and that's a problem. So people should be aware of that. But let's not sneer at these people because, look, everybody reacts to anxiety in irrational ways.
Yes, I just would like to see us be a little bit more resilient. And I say that right now, but I've got nothing in my cupboards either, so I might go home and panic. Anyway, got to go. Nick, Cater, Gideon, Rozner, thanks very much for your time.